You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Eviction cases hit an all-time high in King County last year. It's the latest data point in an ongoing trend. Since the COVID-era eviction moratorium ended in 2022, the number of people facing eviction proceedings has risen every year. This is happening even as rents have remained relatively flat. Hanging over all of this is budget tightening in Olympia. State lawmakers are planning a multi-million-dollar cut to legal assistance for tenants. Are we at a crisis point when it comes to the number of evictions in our area? Here to discuss is Alexis Weisend, real estate reporter at the Seattle Times, who reported on this phenomenon. Alexis, thanks very much for your reporting and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So can we kind of take that 30,000 style look here? We know eviction cases are up across King County and the state. What does that actually look like? What do the numbers say?
Well, last year in 2025, we saw nearly 24,000 eviction cases filed across the state of Washington, which is 3% more than 2024. And the Seattle area was the biggest driver of that increase, where eviction cases in King County grew by 12% to around 8,700 and 16% to almost 2,600 in Snohomish County.
And we're talking about eviction cases. So when a legal proceeding is started, do we know what that means about the number of people who actually are removed from their homes, forced out of their homes?
Interestingly enough, eviction orders are up, at least in King County as well. The King County Sheriff's Office said that they received more orders to kick people out of their homes than ever before in 2025. They received over 6,000 orders from the King County Superior Court.
So this increase comes sort of in the face of some prevailing wisdom that we heard about as the COVID-era eviction moratorium ended in 2022. The conversation really revolved around this backlog of cases that had built up over time. So it was taking longer to, get those proceedings started because there was a moratorium. There was this glut of cases. And so the idea was the courts had to kind of work through those. And that was what was behind kind of that early increase in eviction cases. Is that what we're seeing today? I mean, is this still part of a backlog of cases, Alexis?
That's what's been confusing. It's different in different counties. So King County experienced a major backlog of cases, especially in 2025. It was taking sometimes between 6 and 9 months for cases to go through eviction proceedings. In King County, at least, they are starting to catch up on these eviction cases. They've pretty much gotten rid of their backlog. They added more staff. And at least in the Seattle area, we're starting to see cases flow more smoothly through the court system. So this rise in cases really can't anymore, 3 years later, be attributed to a backlog in cases.
And so what's behind it? What do we know about why eviction cases are still rising in King County?
There are a lot of different opinions on this, but the most common reason that people point to is the affordability crisis. It's something that we've been hearing about over and over again in every part of our lives and every part of the news that we talk about. Although rents have not been going up significantly, they've stayed relatively flat across Washington and in the Seattle area, they're still really high. During the pandemic, at least in King County, they went up around 12% in 2 years between 2020 and 2022. And so people are still dealing with these high rents. And at the same time, other costs are going up, right? The cost of groceries, the cost of childcare, the cost of filling up your car with gas. And so we're still in this recovering from these high prices during the pandemic, and people are still even more so cost burdened by their rent, even more so than before the pandemic.
Low-income tenants have a right to an attorney these days in Washington state if they're going to be facing eviction proceedings. This was part of a law passed in 2021. Is that helping tenants right now that are facing evictions? What did you learn when you looked into this?
Last year in July, I believe, the Seattle Times wrote an article about how in King County, everyone, not every tenant who needed a lawyer was receiving one. There were just too many people that needed help. There were too many cases that had been stacking up in the system. And so in King County, tenants were representing themselves. And that's how it used to work before the pandemic, before the legislature passed this law, um, giving tenants the right to a free attorney. I mean, you have a right to an attorney in civil cases. It was just that the legislature put a bunch of money toward providing free attorneys for low income tenants who could not afford one for themselves, sort of like how you would in a criminal case. And so before the pandemic, these cases would go really quickly because there weren't attorneys to help fight these cases on behalf of low income tenants. And then that changed after the pandemic, after tenants had access to attorneys. But then when we had this backlog of cases, especially in King County, we were starting to see what we saw before the pandemic as far as tenants representing themselves.
So you talked to people who represent tenants in eviction proceedings, attorneys. What did they say about the number of evictions that are happening right now and what's going on?
They said it has been continuously shocking to them. Each year since the pandemic, they've been thinking that, okay, well, we're going to catch up on these backlog of cases. We're going to start to see these going down. But they said that the overall economic environment has made it so that that's not the case, that people are struggling even more than they were before the pandemic to pay their rent.
And what about attorneys who represent landlords? I mean, what are they seeing in this rise in eviction cases?
They are also seeing that this is an affordability issue. 90% of tenants who are facing eviction are facing eviction because of the non-payment of rent. And one of the interesting things is that the cost of evicting someone has really gone through the roof since the pandemic because tenants have access to attorneys now. Cases are taking much longer. And since there's more eviction cases that are going through the courts, there's more of a demand for lawyers to represent landlords. And so a lot of lawyers have increased their prices. So it's really expensive, especially that can be difficult on small landlords. It's really expensive to evict someone now that the pandemic is over. And there are all these new tenant protections that sort of make this process longer.
The number that jumped out to me from your reporting was that a landlord can now expect, because those attorneys have raised their prices, to spend $3,500 to $5,000 on a typical eviction in King County. And for many small landlords, that can mean, it's a wash for them when they finally get this all done. Okay, so Alexis, we're talking about this rise in eviction cases in King County that has continued even after, at least in the county, this backlog of eviction cases had relatively settled down, had cleared after the COVID pandemic moratorium. Meanwhile, the budget for the Office of Civil Legal Aid, which funds these new attorneys for tenants, that budget is facing cuts. State lawmakers are looking at cutting some of the money for the program to shore up the budget from this big shortfall that they're facing. What is the impact potentially there?
There's a lot of concern amongst tenant attorneys right now representing tenants in eviction cases because they're already overwhelmed. They are really struggling to keep up. The lack of attorneys, especially in King County last year, really scared a lot of tenants going through the eviction process. And if attorneys don't get this supplemental funding, as they've been getting to sort of deal with this rise of cases after the pandemic, if they don't get this funding, 17 attorneys across the state are going to be cut. And it's possible that almost 2,000 tenants, not just in King County, but across the state possibly, could go without representation starting in 2027.
I'm talking with Alexis Weisend, real estate reporter for the Seattle Times, about an increase in eviction cases in King County and across the state. Alexis, before we go, I mean, this is obviously an important economic, housing, business story, but it's also just a very emotional story. When somebody is turned out of their home because they can't pay rent, it's incredibly disruptive. All of this is also backing up courts. It's taxing on law enforcement officers who have to go and serve these eviction notices, sometimes physically evict people from their homes. You pointed out that the attorneys who represent small landlords say it can be very emotional, especially when the landlord is connected to these tenants. A little bit different maybe for the corporate landlords. We're, also talking about a big chunk of those eviction cases. What did you learn in your reporting? Like, are we at a crisis point here? I mean, what is the ripple effect of these rising eviction cases?
I think we've been at a crisis point for several years. I think that we've been at that point since evictions did not level off after that initial surge of pent-up demand had hit the courts. We've seen evictions rise roughly at the same rate, at least in 2023 and 2024. And it's just enormous. We have reached a point where we have way more evictions than we did before the pandemic. Landlords are evicting people at a higher rate than they were before the pandemic. And it's not just a population increase, it's more people, more renters failing to pay their rent, and more landlords feeling like they don't have any other choice but to file for an eviction.
Alexis Weisend, real estate reporter at the Seattle Times, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.